In Lesson 1, we talked about how grammar and the act of writing can sometimes seem like a very complicated process. We also talked about how to simplify this process by breaking our simple sentences or independent clauses up into actors, usually called the subject of the sentence, actions, which are referred to as the verb or predicate of the sentence, and answers, which in technical grammar include direct objects, indirect objects, prepositional phrases, adverbs, appositives, complements. The list goes on and on. Fortunately for us, we don't have to remember all those key terms. We just have to remember that when we take one of those simple sentences, we can usually break it up into three parts: the actor, the action, and the answer, or in this case, answers. Our goal for today is to define phrases and dependent clauses, and to also start to look at how those phrases and dependent clauses can sometimes function as actors, actions, and answers. Let's begin by defining phrases. Phrases never have an actor and an action working together. Sometimes they have one, sometimes the other, and sometimes neither. An example of a phrase would be running to the mall. Why is this a phrase? Well, we don't know who is doing the action of running. So because you don't have the actor and the action working together, that's what makes it a phrase. It is safe to say that a phrase can never stand alone as a simple sentence or an independent clause, because independent clauses and simple sentences must have at least actors and actions working together. Now, clauses are a little bit different. Sometimes clauses can stand alone, and those are called independent clauses, and sometimes they cannot stand alone, and those are called dependent clauses. But no matter what type of clause you're dealing with, all clauses must have at least an actor and an action working together. Sometimes it's nice to have an answer in there as well, but they must have an actor and an action. An example of a clause would be the boy runs. This is a clause because we have an actor, the boy, and he is doing the action of running. So that relationship is what makes it a clause. So how do you remember the differences between clauses and phrases? I always tell my students to think of Santa Claus versus Santa phrase. Santa Claus, he has everything in his bag. He's got actors, he's got actions, and a lot of times he even has answers. So you probably want him to come to your house. Santa phrase, on the other hand, he never has everything in his bag. Sometimes he has actors, sometimes he has actions, sometimes he has answers, but he never has all three working together. So when it comes to competition, Santa Claus always beats Santa phrase. Let's begin by looking a little bit more closely at clauses. Earlier we said that sometimes clauses can be independent and sometimes clauses can be dependent. In Lesson 1 we talked about how independent clauses must have at least an actor and at least an action, and it's nice to have an answer as well. And when they have these things, they can function as simple sentences. The problem is dependent clauses also have these three things a lot of times, but they cannot stand alone. In the first example at the bottom, the boy kicked the ball, this is a complete thought. It has an actor, an action, and an answer. It can function as a simple sentence. But when you put the word after in front of it, now it can no longer stand alone because it's no longer a complete thought. There are two categories of dependent clauses that we need to look at. There are those starting with subordinating conjunctions, and those are called subordinate clauses, and there are those starting with relative pronouns, and those are called relative clauses. Subordinate clauses are pretty easy to understand. All subordinate clauses begin with subordinating conjunctions. What that means is this: if you take any independent clause, no matter how wonderfully written that independent clause is, and you put a subordinating conjunction in front of the actor, that independent clause becomes a subordinate clause. Here's how it works. These are all subordinating conjunctions. Below are independent clauses. The actors are in blue, the actions are in green, and the answers are in purple. So the boy walked to the woods, the sun set behind the trees, the leaves rustled in the breeze, it became darker. These are all simple sentences. They all can work alone. But if we take any of the subordinating conjunctions above and put them in front of the independent clauses become subordinate clauses. What you get then might look like the following: when the boy walked to the woods, as the sun set behind the trees, while the leaves rustled in the breeze, because it became darker. Obviously, these are no longer complete thoughts. Now, the first thing we have to do, of course, is lowercase the first word of the original independent clause. The second thing we're going to have to do is, since these can no longer stand alone, we have to learn how to either include them in an independent clause or attach them to an independent clause. And we'll be learning how to do that in a future lesson. Relative clauses are a little bit trickier. All relative clauses begin with relative pronouns, and those relative pronouns function as the actors of their relative clauses. So here are some relative pronouns, and here they are inside clauses. What I'm going to do is highlight the actors in green and the actions in yellow. So the first one, that was in the other room. The second one, whose is working with house is the actor. Whose house is haunted. Who left this morning. Whichever is the best way. Whosoever takes the last piece of pizza, which is brand new. So what makes all of these clauses is that they have actors and actions working together, but they can't really stand alone unless you were to turn one or two of them into questions. So that's why they're relative clauses, which are also known as dependent clauses. They can't stand alone. They have to be either inside an independent clause or somehow connected to an independent clause. To make our lives easy, let's agree to call all subordinate and relative clauses dependent clauses because that's exactly what they are. They cannot stand alone. However, they can function inside independent clauses as one of the parts, as either an actor or as an answer. In the example below, the dependent clause, whosoever takes the last slice of pizza, is the actor of the entire independent clause. What is the action of that dependent clause? It's takes. What is the action of the independent clause? It's shall be banished. So the entire actor, whosoever takes the last slice of pizza, that person shall be banished for all time. So this is just one of the ways that dependent clauses function inside independent clauses. Now let's briefly talk about phrases. Phrases, like dependent clauses, also cannot stand alone. But phrases, like we already said, never have an actor and an action working together. Sometimes they are just the actor, the boy. Sometimes they are just the action, has gone. And sometimes they are neither the actor nor the action, to the store. But because phrases can function as the actor or the action or the answer of independent clauses, you will find them inside independent clauses. In the first example, the tall boy left the small office. The tall boy is the actor phrase. The small office is the answer phrase. And then the example below that, the tall boy left the small office after the meeting. Well, now we added an additional answer phrase on top of the small office. So you will see phrases inside independent clauses quite often. And then there will be times when dependent clauses and phrases will appear inside sentences together. In this example, the tall boy is our actor phrase. What is his action? He left. And why did he leave? Because it was time to go home. Technically, because it was time to go home is a dependent clause, but we're treating it as the answer in this sentence. Now, this entire lesson was basically just an introduction into phrases and dependent clauses and how they function inside sentences. This is just the start. What we're really still focused on is that all simple sentences must have at least an actor and an action, and a lot of times they will have an answer as well. And a lot of times those actors and those actions and answers will appear in the forms of dependent clauses and phrases. So thanks again for joining me. In the next lesson, we'll look a little bit more at how these phrases and dependent clauses function inside sentences. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.